TV, I still have a knack for trying to connect socially, and really for the cause of Alzheimer's now. So I have my little camera. I'll be staring down at this, even though I didn't put my glasses on. I have my emergency water and tissue because my nose and head thinks it's spring. And so do all of our flowers. Thank you. I walked in today and I had a good memory of walking into this church because I attended one of the classes that this church had where I learned a lot of information about Alzheimer's. It was a great class. I was scared to death. But the more knowledge that I gained in a class like that and other classes throughout our city, I felt more empowered because at the very beginning of this process, I was completely helpless and knew I had to lean into my Lord and Savior Jesus like nobody's business because I was anxious. So you already know my background. I've lived here for over 40 years, so I have seen some familiar faces out here, and that's really fun and sweet. That's what I love about living in Little Rock. It's not too big and not too small. So my parents were both diagnosed at the same time, same year. I'm going to go back a little bit because I'm going to use some terms that were absolutely foreign to me: cognitive memory impairment, and then Alzheimer's and dementia and Lewy body and Parkinson's. That came later. What I noticed, because I'm very close to my mom, my father at the time lived in Alton, Illinois, and I could tell he was going through some changes because we traveled internationally every year. That was his thing. And so I just noticed things, did not know what was going on. I mean, this is a man that takes care of himself. He'll get up and on the ship, he'll get his own meal and salad. He loves to eat, but he would not move sometimes. So I felt irritated, like, well, I'll go make your salad then. And God used a woman in line. I do not remember what she said. I wish I did. She could tell I was agitated. And I know that it was out of fear. Like, what's going on with my dad? And she made a statement that made me in that moment know. Now, if she used Alzheimer's or dementia, I just don't recall. But she highlighted what she saw in my dad based on some experience. And then she laid it, and then it changed everything for how I handled my dad from that point forward. So again, grateful that God used a total stranger on our trip, and then really paid attention because I realized I couldn't take my eyes off of him. If I said, Dad, stay here, I'm going to go get an umbrella, it looks like it's going to rain, and we're about to go on the tour bus, before I know it, he was walking up to a bus that wasn't ours. So I was hoofing. So around that same time, so I'm going to say 2015, noticed changes, both in my mom and dad. My mom was retired, but I could tell that she was struggling with things that she did very well. Checkbook. Was getting confused about certain things. Bills were not getting paid. Now, I lived at home with my mom. We shared a home together. So I would notice those easily. The difference between my mom and dad is Dad waved the red flag, the white flag, and said, something's wrong with me, I need help. Mother, yes, mother and daughters know. She was scared, but she was not going to let me know that. And so she reminded me often, I'm the mother and you're the daughter, as I would kind of figure out ways to stumble into these conversations about late bills, etc., and then find creative ways to pay them for her. So all this was going on. I was working a full-time job, and we took a trip. My brother was living in Hawaii, still is now, at the time, and they really wanted to go visit him. And so I took both of them. Met my dad. At that time, I didn't know what they had, but now I know. Do not travel over long periods, especially internationally, with a loved one with dementia. It's absolutely so confusing. But they were happy to go see their son, but I was exhausted by the time I got there. And noticed some changes. Now, I associated my mom's changes. I thought it was grief because she lost her best friend, her sister, in 2016, and it was devastating. So I just kind of like, wow, she's depressed and grief-stricken. My dad would call me and tell me he was still 80 years old teaching tennis. That's his love. And he would tell me that he would leave the court to go to the restroom, and then he would be at home. And they would call and say, Clint, where are you? The students. And he had no idea. So he would share those things with me, and I was like, whoa, okay. Now his diagnosis there, and I didn't live there, he had a brother that looked after him, but was Parkinson's. So I didn't know anything about Parkinson's. So I was like, oh, well, that makes sense why he kind of shuffles around a little bit and why a little bit of his arm shook. Not bad, because that was his tennis arm, but it shook. So we take this trip to Hawaii, and Dad seems nervous, he seems anxious, but he's with family, he's with his son, he's with us, and Mom and Dad have always been extremely cordial since the divorce, thankfully. So it's not unusual that we would travel together. But my mom, and again, my brother kind of brushed it off a little bit because he wasn't around them as much. So if I brought up an issue with him, he'd go, oh, it's just this or that. But there was a time that my mom goes, Theba, is Aunt Faye dead? You know, that happened the year before. And I was like, yes, ma'am, she died last year. Oh. And I really took note of that. Again, brushed it off as grief. So we get back from Hawaii, this is 2017, yes, and within weeks my dad does not want to be without me, and he's scared. He tells me a little bit more about his worries and his forgetfulness, etc. And I said, Dad, what do you want? He goes, I want to live there near you. And I said, done. I was scared to death. I was already aware that the doctor had said that Mom was having cognitive memory issues, but yet had not been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Dad, I just thought, was physically slowing down, but he seemed alert. So we moved him here. God was gracious, as he always is, and within a month I got my dad moved here. And I went and flew there, and we drove here. I got him an apartment right up near the racket club, some place familiar for him, and if he could play tennis, that would be great. Didn't know it at the time, and then we lived down in Foxcroft. So I could drive by, check on him. He was excited. Got his apartment completely filled out already. We didn't move any of that old furniture he had. I feel really bad about that now, but it was his mom's furniture. So, because he was caring for his mom. So I was like, Dad, I'm getting all new furniture. So I was really thankful for Marketplace on Facebook at the time. It didn't take long before I realized Dad was not doing well. Things that he did so well. Ride a bike, he didn't know how to change the gears. And I would get him meals. He loved turkey sandwiches, and I would drop by and I'd look to see if he had eaten a sandwich, if he made a sandwich. And I said, did you have your turkey sandwich? And he goes, yeah. But I could tell that the only thing that was open was the turkey. And the bread hadn't been open. He didn't cut the tomatoes and the lettuce like he liked. And so I go, Dad, so you ate turkey? Yeah, I had a turkey sandwich. Now at that time, because I was worried about him, I got the little Nest Cam cameras and put one in his bedroom. Now of course I asked for permission, but at that time he didn't even know what they were. And that's when I realized things weren't well. He didn't sleep, he wandered around the apartment. Again, he wasn't eating. So I said, Dad, now my dad was financially able to have a caregiver, home care. So I said, Dad, would you feel better if I had someone come 4 hours a day, fix you lunch? And he was like, yes. So I was like, okay, well, we'll do that. Set that up, found a great resource for that. Again, all these things, I'm a proactive person, so as I shared stuff with my friends who had gone through cognitive memory or Alzheimer's or dementia, they may have been too careful to say what they thought Dad might have had or Mom, but I would set in motion a caregiving group that I could call right away and go, hey, my dad needs somebody. So I was learning all these things through classes and groups and personal experiences. So I was grateful for how God supplied those resources to me. And it didn't take long before Dad then wanted 8 hours a day. I was like, that's fine, Dad. We'll do that. And then at night I realized, what's going on? So in 2018, maybe the early part, I took both of them to UAMS at the time for a proper diagnosis. Dad, of course, he was always following me everywhere. He didn't mind what I did, but I had to be very strategic with my mother. Well, Mama, this is a longevity. This is for people your age, and since I take Dad, let's go too. So in that expertise, he was diagnosed with dementia Lewy body, which then I was like, huh? And Mom, what I call garden variety Alzheimer's, meaning that she can speak, and she's hilarious. She's very calm. She enjoys life as long as it's right there in that house. She knows where she is and who she is at the moment, but at times she, in her prayer time, thinks I'm her sister and thanks God for our parents. So I can tell that there's shifting going on, but most of the time I'm Theba, I'm her daughter, and she's the mother, and she knows that. So I had both of these diagnoses, and so I was in clearly a panic because of the lack of information that I felt like I still had and needed. So that's why I really dove into the classes and resources. Immediately got in touch with, because I was on TV, I knew people that had been on the show for Alzheimer's Arkansas and also Alzheimer's Association. So I tapped into them really fast, and then tried to navigate this on my own and thought I could. I mean, I could figure this out. Dad's right there, he's got care, I got Mom. And then one day I was in Kroger, because I shopped for both of them at the same time, and I realized I stared at the cereal for like 20 minutes, and I didn't want to move. I didn't want to go home, and I knew I couldn't go anywhere. And I realized I was in a little bit of trouble emotionally. So God provided a great counselor, Christian counselor for me, and I went every week. Then after a while, she tried to kick me out of the nest, and I didn't want to go. But I needed someone to talk to about everything that was going on, because what I did not realize at my age, and my parents were then in such need of me, that childhood triggers would happen. They happen for all of us. So having Mom and Dad in the same community, town, sometimes sharing the same space, brought up some childhood issues. So I was kind of like, those were kind of coming up, and I've had a great childhood, but like us all, there are hurtful things and sad things, especially on parents' divorce. So I got that in motion, got all these things in motion for myself so that I could be the best caregiver to them. So we will go to 2021. I went part-time. Now my father had died of dementia in 2019, and I could spend 30 minutes talking about how God handled that for us and how incredibly gracious He was to my father and to our family. In 2021, I was working part-time, but I felt God calling me. Now my mom doesn't have the financial resources my dad, and I handled those bills, and they were astronomical. But I just kind of went on cruise control because it came out of my dad's account and he had the money. But I knew eventually with my mom, I was going to be her most qualified and cheapest caregiver. Nonetheless, I wanted to honor her. I wanted to glorify my Father in heaven and honor her. I wasn't anxious about leaving work. I wasn't oblivious to the fact that it was going to be a financial issue, but I also trusted Him that He was going to take care of all of our financial needs. So I left work, and last year was my first full work year, or lack of work year. Now in 2019, I had no idea what a podcast was, but God had laid on my heart to start a podcast. I was absolutely clueless, thank goodness for YouTube. And I got on there, and I knew a budget that I would spend. And because we were in the pandemic, I could do it from my home. And I wanted to start a podcast for caregivers. Now, I believe with all my heart that even though I had an avenue on TV to talk about the disease, and I really felt like that's why I tell people that the only reason I was in front of the camera at THV11 on the Vine was because during the pandemic they were desperate. So I went live from my house, and that's how everyone got to know Mom and got to know Alzheimer's. That's probably my mother going through the front door. So that little chime goes off, and I look down. But so I began talking. They needed content, and so I began to share our journey. So that was during the pandemic, 2021. We started rolling back into work. Again, they were desperate to have someone on TV with Ashley. So 3 times a week I did that and kept up the conversation about Alzheimer's and caregivers. So I felt like it was a real privilege and opportunity. Did not know the impact, because we were also isolated. Did not understand and know the impact of what I shared until I went to my first live shot with Tom Brandon for Summer Cereal Drive, and people came up to me and said, "Thank you for sharing," and I was just blown away. So I knew that I would need to continue to get the word out to caregivers, just to give them a resource of any knowledge or some of the best things I ever learned were in a caregivers group, a tool they would share about how they took care of something or changed something at the house, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So anytime you can learn anything about the disease, and of course Lewy body was an extremely aggressive form of dementia, so I needed to have a caregiver full-time with the experience. But anytime, I hope I'm doing okay on time, all right, anytime that I could continue to learn about the disease and then share the disease, that's where I am. So Mom is now in her transition. She still knows who she is and who I am 99% of the time. But I tried to go once a week and take a day trip with her with some friends, and we would maybe go to Pinnacle or just get her out. And she indicated to me last week that she doesn't want to go out anymore. And there was some grief, but I was doing that for her. I didn't need to get out, really. I mean, it's kind of dangerous out there, driving. And so I heard her. I was grateful she articulated that to me. She goes, just all those people. And cars scared her. I could tell even in restaurants it was too much stimulation. But we had our walks, and we would go on our walks, and I would video those and put them on my YouTube page. And she enjoyed them right there in the neighborhood. And then she indicated to me that she wasn't comfortable walking anymore. So the disease is creating a smaller and smaller world for her. The home, her cats, me, that's her safe place. If she can go out on the porch, she's in heaven. So I'll go out there with her. It's what she wants. I'm entering into her reality. Is there grief for me when that happens? Yeah, every time there's a little bit of a shift, even though it's not dramatic. Now, my father's changes were extremely dramatic, but anytime there's a shift, I have to go on a walk and kind of get through it. But I know God is with me. I know He continues to provide protection and shelter and clarity and wisdom and all the things I so desperately need, especially when I'm really tired and worried. When I get a little bit worried, I gotta go right to Him. Anyway, so I do have that podcast. It's called Don't You Remember? I try to do 2 a month, and one of them is always with an expert from the Alzheimer's Association or Arkansas. And I have my YouTube page that I try to put some stuff on. So I just want to thank you guys for having me. It's a subject it's my life. And I want to, as I said earlier, I want to glorify God and I want to honor her. And in doing that, I'm blessed beyond measure, and I know that I can do it through His strength. Thank you very much.